So, after World War I, the Germans are dealing with a society that is deeply frustrated. They gave their all, and they lost. Sometimes in life you can do nothing wrong and still fail. It's a life lesson. Learn it. And remember that the next time something doesn't work out your way. It may not be because you failed or because you were a lousy person. It may just be because you can do everything right and still not win. But the Germans take this idea of nothing really went wrong here to a ridiculous degree, and most Germans blame their defeat on being stabbed in the back by Jews, socialists, and traitors. They are furious on a personal level about the war guilt clause, which makes them culpable, morally responsible for something that isn't their fault. And their economy is keeping them needlessly impoverished because of the indemnities that the Allies assess to Germany. Germany has to pay off its debts before anything else, and its debts are to the victorious Allies. Item D. D for disarmament. Germany is in the midst of the North European plain, where Germany starts and France stops, where Germany stops and Poland begins, or where Russia begins, is based on the placement of the armies at the end of the last war. Everyone knows this. Plus, Germany, the Klein Deutschland model of Germany that was built by Bismarck, was built around Prussia, whose central institution was the Prussian army. So the Germans feel this sense of militarism as being a normal part of German life, because the German military literally stands between Germany and the extinction of Germany because of its neighbors coming in and winning a war or partitioning it. And Germans have, since the unification, taken great pride in their army and their navy. But now, as a result of losing the war, Germany's army is going to be limited to 100,000 men, which is basically a large police force by European army standards of the early 20th century. The German army is not going to be allowed to have tanks. It's not going to be able to build heavy artillery. It's not going to be able to develop aircraft. No Luftwaffe, no Air Force. It's not going to be able to build heavy warships. It's going to be forbidden to develop submarines. The German army is forbidden to engage in aggressive maneuvers for training purposes, and it's not even allowed to go into the western region of Germany, which is known as the Rhineland, because that area until around 1930 is occupied, actually until beyond 1930, is occupied by the French and the other Allies. In fact, American troops are stationed in Western Germany throughout the 1920s. So Germany has to give up its army and its navy, except for a few old battleships and coastal patrol vessels for the navy, and except for a 100,000-man infantry-based army, which isn't going to be useful at all in case war comes. Imagine that you are a person who lives in a bad neighborhood, like my old neighborhood in the Bronx, and you have a legal right to own guns and keep them in your apartment to protect it. And then gun control laws are passed that force you not only to stop buying guns, but to give up everything but a single revolver that you own and that you have in your apartment. So now you live in a lousy neighborhood in the Bronx with a single revolver in your apartment, whereas the criminal element have whatever weapons they want, they can get through the gun black market. The Germans feel furious, humiliated, poor, and weak or vulnerable because of the disarmament. Finally, the frontier crime. The frontier crime is the seizure of German territory from the Kleindeutschland model of Germany and the hypocrisy of the Allies as regards Austria. I will explain. This area of Posen and West Prussia was part of the German Empire, as was the city of Danzig, as was East Prussia. Well, after World War I, East Prussia remains part of Germany. But Danzig is taken away and it becomes a free city so that the Poles will have a place to do business with the world. And this area of Posen and West Prussia is turned into a Polish corridor to allow the nation of Poland, the new nation of Poland, to have access to the sea. Actually, the Poles don't need Danzig. They build the city of Gdynia down the coast near the mouth of the Vistula River. So these areas that were German are gone. This part of Upper Silesia is given over to Poland and the Czechs. Alsace-Lorraine is given back to the French. Everyone expected that. It's probably the least problems. Eupen and Malmedy are given to the Belgians. And parts of Holstein are given back to the Danes. So Germany has lost territory. It's been nibbled around the edges like a cookie. But this is all in the name of national self-determination. But as national self-determination does not apply to the defeated peoples, Austria, which is culturally German in every respect, Austria, which was going to be included in any Großdeutschland type unification scheme of the mid-19th century, Austria, who has just been stripped of its non-German possessions to make these microstates in Eastern Europe, Austria, by the logic of national self-determination, should have been made part of Germany. But the French were already afraid of a Germany unified with such a big population that France is going to be relatively smaller and smaller and smaller, and Germany bigger and bigger and bigger, both in terms of population and economic output, and therefore in terms of military power. The French went bug nuts at even the thought of adding the population and economic power of Austria to the German Empire, the German Reich. So Germany is nibbled away in the frontier crime, and Austria is not unified with Germany. And this is a problem. So all of these things are grievances. Add to that the fact that the first thing that the German Republic does, the republic whose constitution is written in the university town of Weimar, thus it is called the Weimar Republic. The very first thing it does is it asks for an armistice from the Allies. It then has to agree to the Treaty of Versailles, which includes all of these things, accepting war guilt, indemnities, disarmament, the frontier crime. And it's believed by many who ascribe to the stab in the back theory that the government of the Weimar Republic, led by the Social Democratic Party in Germany, is in fact the very group of traitors that stabbed the German army in the back in the first place. So, the German people are not behind their government. The Weimar Republic, throughout its entire life between the fall of the Kaiser and the rise of the Nazis, understands that the German people really don't feel a sense of loyalty to it, that it is not really legitimate in the eyes of the Germans, because many Germans view the Weimar Republic as a government imposed by the Allies as a condition of accepting Germany's surrender, getting rid of the Kaiser, getting rid of the empire, and replacing it with a Western-style parliamentary republic. The German people never really warm up to the Weimar Republic. And the problem with that is going to be, as these grievances percolate through the 1920s, the government is going to be acting from a position of weakness. But when the 1920s end, it ends with an apocalyptic doomsday. The crash of the New York stock market in October 1929 ushers in a global economic catastrophe where 1 man in 4 in the United States are out of work. And the United States is the most advanced, successful economy in the world. If my grandfather knew families that starved to death in Vermont in the early period of the Depression in the United States, just think how many Germans knew people who starved to death in Germany. Suddenly, vast amounts of wealth that had been there disappear, because wealth ultimately is what somebody is willing to pay for what you've got. And if nobody has money, nobody can pay, and therefore the value goes down. So suddenly we have tens of millions of American families, or tens of millions of Americans out of work, and their families do not have any kind of support. The same thing sort of begins to happen in Germany. As the German economy collapses, it is still told by the British and French that they need to pay their indemnities so that the British and French economies don't get as bad as Germany's does, and so that they can pay off the Americans. Ultimately, the Germans are going to default on their indemnities because they can't pay. But one of the things that the Germans do to try to deal with the indemnity problems and to try to deal with the depression is they hyperinflate their currency. In other words, they start printing money. That's an old kind of printer that you've probably never heard of. They start printing money without backing it with gold or anything else that's valuable. Suddenly, there is massive amounts of German bills, of German paper money in the economy. The more of something that there is, the less valuable each piece becomes. And soon, the hyperinflation steals the wealth of middle-class Germans, their bank accounts, because soon a Reichsmark is not worth the paper it's printed on. Factory workers and janitors go to work with a wheelbarrow on payday to get their wheelbarrow filled with paper money that you might as well use as toilet paper because it cannot buy anything. That is hyperinflation. The printing of vast amounts of money without backing it up produces a shrinking of the value of each Reichsmark until the point where it is basically worthless. This is where things stand in the early 1930s. And it is this period of existential crisis that Adolf Hitler is going to step out onto the national stage in Germany and ultimately to the world stage next time.